All right, folks, welcome to Studio 39. This is our demo on Whoppie Pies. If you want to just take a quick glance at the recipe, which is on the monitor, this is the same recipe that if you go to your Canvas, under the baking cookbook, you can find this recipe. Color coordinations are just basically steps that match up with the ingredients. First thing we want to always keep in mind is what is our mise en place for today. Mise en place meaning everything in place. You hear that word a lot. You heard it at the beginning of the semester. You're going to continue to hear it throughout the course of the semester. Mise en place includes not only what you're going to be cooking with, but also your cleaning supplies. So over here, I've got my dish bin set up so I can make cleaning fairly easy. I've got my dry dish bin ready to go so that as I use equipment, after I'm done using it, I can let it go into the sink and let it soak so it doesn't take as long to clean at the end. Also with my mise en place, the equipment that I'm going to need, I know I'm going to need to sift my dry ingredients. So I have my bowl, I have my dry ingredients. I've already gone ahead and cracked my egg in something separate to avoid any shells. I've got my dry measuring cups. I also have my liquid measuring cups on my speed rack. So for this recipe, this is a classic devil's food cake. Whoppie pie did a sandwich with a confectioner's sugar and butter icing. We're going to sandwich them together as our final product. Along with my mise en place, I have my sheet trays. Sheet trays are going to include wax paper. You can use foil. You don't have to use anything at all. Make sure though that you butter your pans so that they don't stick at the very end. And also I need a cooling rack so that when they come out of the oven, I can flip them over so they stop the cooking process and cool off. I also have some towels around my countertop, so if I need to wipe things up, I can do so easily. All right. So for this recipe, we're going to cream together our butter and sugar. The recipe calls for 3 ounces of butter. On your butter sticks, there are measurements. A full stick of butter is 4 ounces, so I'm looking for 3/4 of an ounce. Each tablespoon, 2 tablespoons equals an ounce. If you look at your stick of butter, and I'm looking for 6 tablespoons, which is equal to 3 ounces, and I'm just going to cut right down the line. This is going to go into my electric mixing bowl, and my paddle attachment is the attachment that I'm going to use today when I cream. This is for sturdy ingredients. The whisk would not be a good option as it gets clogged in the whisk. I also need 2/3 of a cup of granulated sugar, so I'm going to take my 2/3 cup. I've got my granulated sugar here. I've got my level. Just going to scoop this up. Sugar is a little easier to level. You don't really have to go too crazy. You can shake it off and it'll work just the same. And at this point, start my mixer on low so it doesn't splatter all over the place. And while that's working, I'm going to start measuring out my dry ingredients, and I'm going to do that into my sifter to save some time. So I need 1 1/3 cups of all-purpose flour. So again, I'm going to take a big heaping cup of flour, and I'm just going to level that off so that it presses in and eliminates any air pockets. That will go into my sifter. So there's my 1 cup, and now I need my 3rd cup. Again, using my dry ingredient, big scoop, level it off, into my sifter. I also need 1/3 of cocoa powder, 1/3 cup of cocoa powder, so I can go ahead and use my dry ingredient measure for that. I'm going to clean out, get some flour out of it. The same thing, I'm going to scoop a big mound of cocoa powder. So this is our source of chocolate for today. And I'm going to level that off as well. This is going into my dish bin. Make sure my mess is cleaned up. I also need a 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to just take my 3/4 measurement. For my 1/4 measurement, measure it 3 times. As this starts blending, you just want to keep an eye on it. You can actually turn your speed up. Right now it's crumbled, it's in the crumbled state. It will blend together using the friction of the paddle against the sides of the bowl. All right, and the salt sugar. Oh, quarter of a teaspoon. I need just a quarter of a teaspoon. Just measure that. Salt, cocoa powder, and flour are going to get sifted together. And you can see as it's sifting, there are a bunch of lumps, mainly in the cocoa powder. So from here, I can just press that through, and that'll smooth that out. And if there's any salt left over, you just flip it over. And I'm done with my sifter. All right. So once my butter and sugar are creamed together, I'm just gonna lift my bowl. I can still add a little bit more speed. I want that just a little bit more combined so it becomes light and fluffy. Looking for some solid mass out of this. At this point, I can now add my whole egg. And again, I cracked it in something separate so I don't have any shell. And what's going on here is I'm now creating an emulsification by adding air to the egg so that it will blend with the butter, and which is the fat product, and also the sugar. And I'm lifting the bowl here to help it scrape, but occasionally you've got to take your rubber spatula and you got to scrape your bottoms and your sides to make sure everything gets incorporated, because that will stick to the bottom of your bowl. We're almost there. Now the leavening agent for this is baking soda. And we're going to add the baking soda to warm water. And what that does is it creates the energy that we need. It's called endothermic versus exothermic. Endothermic means that you create the energy ahead of time, and exothermic means that you're going to create it gradually through heat transfer in your oven. And I need 3/4 of a teaspoon for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure out my half, big scoop, level that off, and then my quarter. So I got a 1/4 teaspoon, a 1/2 teaspoon, which is equal to 3/4 of a teaspoon. I'm going to blend that together, let that sit for a second. This is all set. And we're also using buttermilk. And buttermilk is an acidic cultured cream that helps the leavening agent activate as well. It also gives some body and texture to our final product. I didn't have any buttermilk, so what I did is I created this through dry milk, a little bit of water, and I added some lemon juice. So if you don't have buttermilk at home, you can make your own with just a little bit of lemon juice, adding an acid to the cream so that it curdles. All right. So from here, I'm going to lower my bowl, and I'm going to just gradually add my dry ingredients. But here's the key: I got to get my paddle out of the way. There we go. And I'm just going to add my dry ingredients. Again, when I'm done using something, it goes right in my dish bin, so it's out of the way. I bring my bowl up. Again, I have to start slow so it doesn't splatter all over the place. And at this point, I'm going to add my buttermilk gradually while the machine is on. And I'm going to add my leavening agent, which is my baking soda and water. And I just don't want to dump it in. I want it to kind of collect itself before I start adding. Again, you're trying to emulsify this with the protein of the flour to blend it into a smooth texture. I also don't want it splattering all over the place. And now I can turn my speed up a little bit. Really get some air into the batter. Really creating that emulsification. Right before I finish, I'm going to scrape my bottoms and my sides. So right now I'm looking at this batter and it looks a little bit loose for me. I think it's going to run on the sheet tray. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another 1/3 cup of flour. Again, before I do that though, I want to sift it. I just need to tighten this up just a little bit. It's a little loose. And this happens. Just a quick way to fix it. And what I'm looking for are for ribbons to form in the batter as it's mixing, which I'm starting to see a little bit. It's starting to pull back. This way I know when I put it on the sheet tray, it's going to hold and not run. And you can see it kind of pulling away in streams and strands. All right, looks good. Pull out my bowl. And I'm just going to bang out my paddle. Get rid of this. Let that soak. I'm going to scrape my bottoms and my sides again, make sure everything is incorporated. And now I'm ready to transfer it to my sheet trays. So on my sheet trays, like I said, I have my wax paper, and I've got 2 sheet trays set up. And for this, I'm going to go with my 3 across, and I'm going to do that first. And I'm trying to level the scoops off so they all bake the same. Thing with whoopie pie that you have to keep in mind, 2 of these portions is equal to 1 whoopie pie because they're sandwiched together. You want to make sure you have an even number when you're finished. Now I can fill in my sheet tray as soon as I have my rows and my columns. And it creates a nice, uniform tray so that it bakes uniformly. There's my first tray. Out of the way. And I'm going to do my second tray. Again, 3 across. This scoop is a 3-ounce scoop. And then I'm going to do my verticals, 4 down. And now that I'm close to the end, I've got to scrape my bowl, get everything to one area of the bowl, get it to the top, just like that, so that I can scoop it out a little bit easier. Finish this off. Just need to make 2 more. And as you can see, the batter is perfect for an even number of whoopie pies. As I mentioned early on, you have to make sure your oven's preheated. Today's oven temp is 400 degrees. And with your trays, you're going to put them in the oven, one on the top shelf, one on the bottom, and you want to have it so that they are left to right as far as the length of the tray. And you just want to set your timer for 8 minutes. Here we go. While that's baking, we're going to make our icing. This is a traditional icing, very similar to an Oreo cookie filling. Before I do that though, I want to make sure I clean up my mess from my whoopie pies. Always work in a clean area. You don't want to be working around a mess. Alright, so for the icing, it calls for 1 stick of butter, And again, we're going to use the paddle attachment for this. So 1 stick or 4 ounces of unsalted butter, 1 2/3 cups of confectioner's sugar, which is a powdered sugar. If you use granulated sugar, it will not work. Also calls for an egg white that I have portioned out before. Some vanilla. And a little bit of flour. So we're going to take our confectioner's sugar, 1 full cup. Again, I'm going to level this off. Confectioner's sugar is a little bit denser than flour, so you really got to make sure it's packed in. So I've got my 1 cup. And then I need my 2/3. I'm going to take my 1/3 cup measure. Same thing, measure 2 of these. Pack it in, level it off. 1/3 and 1 and 2/3. This recipe also calls for a tablespoon and a teaspoon of flour. And what that does is that creates the binding agent using the protein from the flour during the mixing process. So I'm just going to level that off. 1 tablespoon, teaspoon, nice and level. And I can add that. Bring our bowl up. And again, we're going to start on a light speed so that it doesn't splatter all over the place. Sometimes it's best to put your butter out and let it sit to get warm. Makes things move a little smoother. And the last piece to this is 1½ teaspoons of vanilla, which I'm going to measure away from the recipe so that if I over measure, it doesn't alter what I'm trying to get. Alright, so now as this butter breaks up, I'm going to start adding a little bit more speed. I'm going to add my egg white, and I'm going to add my vanilla. And as this binds, we're going to turn our speed up so we can add air. And air is what's going to really lighten this icing up. Also, the friction for the paddle is going to break up the butter chunks, make it nice and smooth. Again, I can lift my bowl, and that actually will help scrape the bottom, just until I feel the paddle scraping against the bottom. At that point, I'm going to add more speed, really let that thing whip up. And you can see it getting lighter with every turn of the paddle. Really smooth. And at this point, I'm just going to bring my paddle down, and just like with the Whoopie Pies, I'm going to scrape the bottom and the sides of my bowl. You can use the paddle to help you out. Again, just to get rid of any lumps and areas in the bowl that just did not mix. Bring my bowl up. And I'll let this go for about 30 more seconds, and we should be all set. So now we have our Whoopie Pies that are out. I put them on a cooling rack, and as I mentioned, two of these makes one Whoopie Pie. So I'm just making sure they're not sticking, and I just need to invert them now. And I do everything in a very organized assembly line manner. Just really helps with your speed and your efficiency. All right, so we're gonna bring down our icing. I'm gonna clean off my paddle using my rubber spatula. One thing to note, when I was testing these, the timer did go off, but I also pressed them. And I'm looking for firm and a little bit of spring back, which occurred. They may be a little bit soft because they're warm, but even when I flip them over, you can tell that they've got a nice devil's food cake consistency to them. All right. I'm gonna scrape all of my icing to one area of the bowl, because it's just really much easier to work with if it's in one area than in a thin layer throughout the entire bowl. And then I'm going to use a 2-ounce portion scoop, and I'm just going to go ahead and again finish one job before I start the next. So I'm going to just put a dollop of icing. And it's a good friendly amount. I'm telling you, I'm going to skip a row. Stuff tastes so good. All right, now I'm going to sandwich one together, and when you sandwich it, all you're going to do is just gently put it on top and then just kind of swirl it around so that it evenly gets to the sides. I'll put those right on my platter. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover them all first now that I know that I have enough icing in them. Again, finishing one job before I start the next. Now when I'm ready to transfer, now I can do this job of swirling it. And you want to see the icing, so you don't want to sandwich it too tight. All right, this one doesn't have enough icing. We need more. Put a little bit more in there. And then I'm going to sandwich it. Our Whoopie Pie Devil's Food Cake. Here's the one that I made earlier, and I'm going to eat it because these are delicious. So good. I hope you enjoy them.